Ballpark Nation presents. Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Astros fans. It is October 7th already. It's so weird when you go 6 days without a baseball game, which is to think about what we've done. With me, as always, is Brian Arbor from up there in the Northeast and Andy Tom Cheston from the 713. The only one from us from the 713 right now. Gentlemen, let's start with just some general baseball, guys. It's kind of fun to watch stressful baseball games when you're not the one stressed out. Thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're going to watch baseball, it's hard to watch it as a neutral party. So you have to kind of pick a team. Weirdly, the least offensive team to me right now is the Mets. I don't know why. It shouldn't be. I have a history, from 1986, and I am of that vintage. Can't get behind rooting for any of the American League teams. I thought maybe, I could root for the Tigers. No, I just don't like the Tigers. I don't like the Tigers. Now I have a personal reason not to like the Tigers. So I'm having to find reasons. Fortunately for me, it was a really good football weekend, so I got to ignore a lot of the baseball stuff that was happening. But the stuff I was paying attention to, even with the Astros being out of it, they've been really exciting games for the most part. Even if Major League Baseball is very clearly rooting for a Dodgers-Yankees World Series.
Oh my Lord, yeah. If this were Go Tigers today, or no Go Royals, we would be burning shit down. Brian, how much of it have you kept up with?
So my rooting interest is in Schadenfreude, because one of the one of the things that you get to watch other people go through the agony of playoff baseball, which is, as we all know, absolutely terrifying, mortifying. Except, of course, if you win, and then you forget all that. It's apparently what childbirth is like for women. And plus, it was a good weekend.
His name is Brian Arbor. We'll have his email in the description of this podcast to all of our upset women out there.
Thank you. Yes, I deserve that. And anyway, and also from a college football standpoint, also a good weekend for Schadenfreude. Anchor down.
Anchor down, yeah.
You may need to go on the Call Her Daddy podcast and do a little mea culpa to her.
Yeah. No, but it was the Mets Phillies game was exciting and stressful, and I'm so glad I didn't care about either one of them. And I'm kind of with you. I think probably the Mets and the Padres are the two teams I'm sort of the most looking forward to.
It's not even most for me. It's least offensive to me right now are the Mets.
Yeah. Well, and it was nice to see Yu Darvish carve some people up, because so many people thought he sucked, and the reason why we couldn't hit him was because we also sucked. But the elephant in the room, or the elephant not in the playoffs right now, are the Astros. The early exit out of the playoffs, getting swept in the wild card round. The bats did not make the trip. I think most of us thought the game one would go the way it went. Game two, however, anybody that's watched the Astros for any number of years knows a bullpen game is their kryptonite, and it has been since that's become a thing. First of all, Brian, what did you take away of the series itself? Just not looking at macro of the season, just the series itself. What were some of the takeaways that came from it?
Yeah, I think there are two major takeaways I had. One is sort of what you hinted at. The Astros had one extra base hit in two games, and that was a double. I guess Bregman hit one off the wall, but it was a single. So they didn't hit the ball very far. And that's, and they didn't hit a lot of singles. They're usually a good singles hitting team, and they weren't able to do that in those two games. And again, didn't score a lot of runs. I think the other thing to note, of course, is despite that, they had a one-run lead in the eighth inning with two, their two best relievers, as they see it, on the hill, and they got got. That's a situation, despite the lack of offense, you have confidence in Presley and Hader, and they weren't able to come through. In Presley's case, that's the first time in a really long time. Obviously, it's Hader's, I guess it's second playoff game, but his first big playoff situation for the Astros. So hopefully we get more of those in the future. So those to me were the two major takeaways. The bats just overall didn't show up, and the bullpen couldn't walk the tightrope in game two.
Yeah, and you do, Andy. I want to talk about Presley for a second, but yeah, you do. We could talk the offense all we want, and we should, but the whole point of paying those guys all that money at the back end of the bullpen is to preserve a fewer than 3-run lead. In this case, a 1-run lead. You expect them to be automatic. Brian's right. Presley had gone 14 of 14 in his last save opportunities in the playoffs. However, we had seen that story before pretty much throughout the regular season. Just overall, your thoughts on the series and Presley's performance in game two?
Well, I mean, I think you guys have both said what you said. It's we didn't hit. It doesn't matter how well you pitch or how poorly you pitch. If you don't score runs, you're not going to win games. The first game to me was a lot more interesting because I really do think we were 8 inches away from tying that game in the ninth, if not taking the lead. And I think the expected batting average for Jason Hayward's hits or at bat was like 570 or something. And that was a great example of that inning of the baseball gods giveth and the baseball gods taketh away. Because I think Caratini's was even higher. I think it was 660 or something like that. And the Tigers made plays. They made plays when they had to. We didn't. And that's the first time in a really long time from a playoff perspective that we haven't made plays on a consistent basis like that. So it was a disappointing exit. Ryan Presley is an interesting case. He's 35 years old. He's about to be 36 in December. We have him for another year because he met his innings. So he's back on the roster next year. I doubt we're going to carry 4 guys that we're paying large amounts of money to and not playing at all. So yeah, I don't think you're going to add him to the Abreu, Montero, Zach Greinke payroll column quite yet. Hader to me was a bigger disappointment. You go into that game tied, and then he just seemed non-competitive. The double at the end of the dagger through the heart, as it were, off of Hader was probably not the worst pitch in the world, and it was hit well to a part that we just couldn't get to the field. He couldn't get to the outfield in time to catch, and obviously what happened. But Hader to me was very up and down this year, and I know he had 27 or 20 straight save opportunities in a row. But if again, anecdotally, if it was a tie game, if he got into the game when we were behind for whatever reason, it felt like these big hits gave up. I'm wondering at this point, and maybe we should have wondered this back in January when we realized he was going to be on our team. Is he a pitcher that can be effective in Minute Maid Park on a consistent basis? That save streak says yes, he can, but there's a lot of hits given up in those saves. There's a lot of hits given up when he was in games where he didn't have a save opportunity. I think that's more happenstance than anything else, but it's a concern because there's a lot of money tied up in those two guys. With Brian Abreu even having a little bit of regression this year from a really great 23, it's going to be really interesting to see how the Astros put this bullpen together for next year. And yeah, I know you haven't got there yet, but I flipped the switch already on next year and what the roster is going to look like because there's so many questions. For me, the bullpen there's got to be pieces that are going to need to be addressed. But at the same time, there's so many lineup questions that I don't know how much budget's going to be left over for upgrading anything in the bullpen. And I don't even know if you can at this point. So hopefully the Astros pitching lab works up some more magic from a bullpen perspective. I don't know if you can count on Brian King being a shutdown reliever. I don't know if Caleb Ort's going to be better or as good as he was this year. So there's a lot of questions for the Astros to answer pretty much in all aspects of the game going into this offseason.
Yeah, and Brian pointed out that Presley's one deal where Presley is getting older, and that's going to happen, and you gave him a deal that allowed you to have him be your closer to win the World Series. So I think most people with logic will understand that's the situation. The Hader situation is perplexing. And, I think you're right. I wonder if they did take a look at, because apparently his numbers at Minute Maid Park weren't super great as a visiting pitcher either. So I don't know. I do think that's a concern to think about, particularly going forward when we need to fill time on the show between, in the dead zone, as we say. But the year as a whole, my whole deal is I will stand and die on the hill that it was a successful season. And I think you cannot, on one hand, talk about baseball as a game of large sample size, and you have to see that's why we need 162, and then decide whether your season was really a success or not based on what we all agree is the crapshoot of the playoffs. They were good enough to win their division by like 4 games. I think you can say it wasn't the most successful season, but I think to call the season a failure, like so many of our fan base is doing, is absolutely the wrong answer. Brian, we'll start with you on that, man. I mean, to me, you win the division. Like, Andy and I joke about, well, you've won your 82nd game. You're not going to have a losing season now. And then so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so there are two sort of perspectives on this. One is the real challenge in baseball is the long haul, is the 162 game season. And, it was a frightful 162 game season because of the god awful 7-19 start. And so it was more stress on the regular season, but they were able to overcome that. And they did lots of good things to overcome that, in particular, turning around a pitching staff that looked in April like it was going to careen off a cliff. And they were able to get particularly Hunter Brown, who had a great start in game 2 of the playoffs, his first playoff start. They were able to get him turned around and him into one of the better pitchers. And again, hopefully that sort of has benefits, obviously not just this year moving forward. Part of the nature, though, of baseball right now is so much rest on October. And October is hey, did the Astros perform, did the Astros do something wrong, or do they just have 2 bad days? I mean, the answer to that is yes, right? Because those 2 days really matter, right? But losing, having a 2-game losing streak isn't a big deal. But when you have really short series baseball, and this is true for 7-game series as well, much less 3-game series, right? You can't really make big conclusions on that. But of course, the purpose of the playoffs and the purpose of the end is to crown a champion.
Yeah.
As we sort of talked about, the excitement of the playoffs it's such a great way. It's such an entertaining way to crown a champion because it's so fraught at any particular moment where there's so much sort of tense parts of it. And of course, you don't really know which pitch is the key one. There's no 3rd and 7 from your own 35 that you have to make this, or you're going to lose the game. There's no sort of well, they just fouled off this pitch, we'll do it again. Keep doing that. And look, because this team has advanced in the playoffs for 7 straight seasons, it is kind of unusual to us that they didn't this year. But I think one perspective to have on that is we were good, but also fortunate and blessed. We outran the baseball gods for 7 seasons, and they eventually got us. The baseball gods are bastards, as always.
Yeah, Andy, I want you to follow up on that. And I would obviously say, like, it's the most successful season. The goal is to win a World Series. Obviously, that's become the standard around here. But to call the season a failure, to sort of rest 7 months worth of value on anything that happens in October if you come up short, seems silly and a sad way to live.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes from pick on Twitter a little bit. I never do that. The extreme competitor, you're either first place or your last place nonsense that has permeated a lot of society and seems to have replicated itself on Twitter when it comes to our fan base. There are a number of years where 81 wins was a successful season. You won the division this year, so you're one of 6 teams that won a division this year. That's a successful season to me. Did we advance the playoffs? We absolutely did not. Did we look good in the playoffs? No, we didn't. And that's unfortunate, but this is the way the game is played in 2024. I'm not even somebody who's going to bitch about the playoff format. It is what it is. You compete when you compete. Teams advance through that, clearly, because we got beat. So some team had to win that series. 3 other teams won their series to get to the next round. We didn't. And it's anything else is kind of sour grapes. It was a season where we dug ourselves a giant hole, dug ourselves out of that hole, managed to win the division by what would have been probably 4 games, but let's say 3 games. We didn't play that last, the 162. You are a product of both the product you put on the field, but also a product of the division you play in and the competition that you have to keep. The Rangers had a really bad season. For a large part of the season, Seattle had a bad season, or at least not the season they were expecting to have. I don't think our division was quite the worst in baseball, but it certainly wasn't the best. And you probably make an argument that it was the worst. So you're a product of what you have to play with. You play the schedule you have, and you end up where you are. So we won 88 games. Okay, that's not 100. It's not in the 90s, but it was enough to win the division and rest that last week of the season. That's a successful season. We didn't advance. That's the hang up. And I think you're seeing a little bit of what you saw with the 90s Braves or the late 2000s or mid 2000s Braves, where people stopped showing up for wild card games. And yeah, there's a scheduling issue that we probably should talk about with the Astros specifically. But we've gotten an expectation. I don't know if it's a bad thing, but there's an expectation that we're going to advance to the next round. And I think a lot of what you're seeing from fans don't know how to process is it just shock. They have nothing to do. And a lot of us have built our entire personalities on Astros playing second and third and fourth rounds of baseball playoffs. We're not going to do that this year. So there's a lot of what ifing and guessing and feeling sorry for yourself. And there's still a lot of major league franchises that would trade major league rosters with what the Astros are putting on the field right now.
Yeah. I mean, even some of the ones still alive in the playoffs would do that. Yeah, I want to talk about the timing of things, and Andy, we'll start with you. But look, we've been around this. We've been around the world on this. We understand ratings are a thing, and I understand if I'm the one planning, if I'm taking a neutral step backward, and I'm saying I can put the Yankees at prime time or I can put the Astros at prime time, the Yankees game is going to draw better. It's just going to, and not that was the actual competition this year. I mean, I guess I don't know. Yeah, this year we would have been I thought we were the most high profile team playing actually in the wild card round. But what does that say though about for all the Astros success, we're still not seen as a marquee team in the eyes of the league?
I mean, I don't think they're picking on the Astros specifically. You're looking at a Baltimore Kansas series and a Houston Detroit series. I don't know that any of those are a particular draw for baseball. Not for the casual fan and not for what is basically the first leg of a 4-leg championship series. The Mets probably draw better than us. The Braves probably draw better than us. Those are the other teams that we're kind of competing with in this biosphere of early games. Do I think every game should have been midday? But I don't think any of the games should have been midday. I think you have enough television networks that you could have started things at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in whatever time zone you have been playing in and allow those games to compete with one another. I don't think there's a lot of people who are sitting there going, gosh, I hope that I can watch 12 hours of baseball today.
Yeah, almost they should take a Final Four approach, right? The NCAA tournament where there's just games happening.
And I think that's fine for a wild card round, but I think you're still going to draw more fans at the stadium. You're going to draw more eyeballs if people aren't at work and have to compete with something where they got 48 hours notice to show up to a ballpark. And by the way, paying playoff ticket prices. There's a lot of factors in there. I'm not mad at the fans or anything like that. Like you said, I understand why it was a 1:30 game both days. I don't agree with the reasons that were given for it being a 1:30 game, but I don't think any of the wild card games should be 1:30 games. I think everything should be happening when kids are out of school. I mean, really getting down to it, if you're building a fan base, if you care about eyeballs, and the way that Major League Baseball did this, I guess if I'm going to frame it up, it's we know we have to play these games, but we don't really bother to have to cover them. So let's put them in the middle of the day where we're not going to have to interrupt anybody's news or debates or anything else that's happening in the world. We'll worry about the next round with the Yankees and the Dodgers.
And of course, Brian, like everything else, it's a pretty short-sighted perspective to take, because if you don't have one marquee market, if you don't have the, Chicago, the Yankees, or the Dodgers, I do think taking a Final Four approach, spreading them out on all your networks, you then can charge more for airtime. I mean, there's a whole spiraling thing that you can do. But I guess one thing that does disappoint me too, Brian, though, is I guess I was hoping we'd become more of a baseball town. And it does feel like there was a bit pedestrian approach to these playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, so one perspective, like, if you take away from the I want to watch my team perspective, and I'm a neutral fan watching, having the game spread out makes it so people can watch more games. And that's the perspective that Major League Baseball and ESPN have on sort of the wild card, and that's why they're, spread out through the day. And
Even though that's a wrong decision.
what's that?
It's an incorrect decision, but it's a decision.
They played all 4 games at the same time in the 90s, and everyone hated it. So they haven't gone back to that. So,
But everybody hates this too.
what's that?
Everybody hates this too.
Yeah, but I don't know that everyone hates it. People in Houston hate it, right? Because, you got to pull your kids out of school to take them to the games, right? You have to get off of work or, that or the other, right? But again, from a standpoint of if you're in St. Louis watching this.
But you're not watching at work or at school. You know what I mean? Like, you still cut down your possible audience by having it during the work day.
I mean, you can put it on one screen at work while,
Okay, I understand that, but not everybody can do that.
Yeah, you can't.
You and I have the kind of jobs that can't.
Hard to do that when you have 4 at once. Anyway, I'm just, again.
Yeah.
Again, they tried it. They tried it your way. People hated it. Maybe they should go back and try it again. But that is my hypothesis on. That's my hypothesis on that. It's kind of like daylight savings time. They actually tried to take it away, and everyone hated it. Now everyone's forgotten it. Anyway, different issue. Different issue. Is Houston a baseball town? Look, if the Texans are good, right? We know that Houston is primarily a football town over a baseball town. And so now, because the Texans are back to being good, we sort of have to compete with that. Obviously, the one sort of advantage, one advantage of sort of modern life is you can cultivate your feeds, right? However you get it to focus on the things you want to do. And so I try hard to cut out people who were going to give me play-by-play of exhibition football in August, because, we all know we're being scammed. You're just, letting yourself be scammed by watching, practice. And pretending it's something that's real here. I mean, say what you will about spring training, the excitement of, hey, baseball's back lasts for about 2 innings, and then they pull the starters. So, they can cultivate the feed the way you want. So this is, modern life can help you with this.
I guess, I don't know. I'm not going to quit dying on this particular hill, only because the other thing about the 90s is we had about a third few viewing opportunities than you have now. Now you have all kinds of networks. Your entire landscape is different. Networks are hungry for anything that can be ad-based, and that's sports, reality TV, and news. And that's really it. And in less and less, it's becoming reality TV, because more and more reality TV is now being made for streaming. But I want to get a little bit real quick, just a real quick brush on next year. We'll start with Brian. Look, the fact of the matter is the Astros are still going to go into the offseason with one of the better starting rotations on paper, with the opportunity to maybe make some moves with some of those folks to strengthen other parts of the team. I am not willing to concede that next year is going to be another 88 win season. I think there's plenty of opportunity. We'll have a whole episode talking about Bregman. I think there's plenty of opportunity, though, for the Astros to be better than they were next year, if by any reason taking some of that pitching talent and using it to at least improving to average some of those positions that were below average offensively, you do that, and all of a sudden you're a different ball team.
Yeah. So first of all, it's not a very strong division sort of moving forward. So there's every reason I think that the Astros will be the favorite. They won't be as strong as a favorite as they've been in previous years, but they'll be the favorite in the American League West next year. You essentially have 2 franchises that are conceding, and that's helpful. And then you have
which are the two in your mind?
The A's and the A's. I have to call them the A's now, right? Because they don't belong to a city. And the Angels.
I think you also have to consider the Rangers, only because of the news that came out that as of this very second, they have no TV network. And that is such a big source of their income.
Yeah, we'll see sort of where that goes. I mean, but they've also, again, we'll talk about the AL West sort of more, but the issue for for the Rangers is a lot of their young players didn't sort of fully develop this year. And that's sort of the big issue with them moving forward. With Seattle, they have no offense, and I'm not sure they have a plan to get any more. They don't plan to spend any more money. So
54%, baby.
So they didn't even reach that this year. So, and again, the way you get to 54% is not by aiming to get to 54%, Jerry Dipoto, which again, everyone could tell you except for Jerry Dipoto. Anyway, so to thank the rest of the AL West for their efforts here. To your bigger point here about the rotation, it's a fascinating thing, right? Because There is one plan of just saying status quo ante and replace the two guys leaving the rotation, Verlander and Kikuchi, with the two guys coming back from injury, McCullers and Garcia. And that is a dubious plan, right? Unless you feel really, 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 really confident about. I mean, to be fair, Luis Garcia hasn't come back from this type of injury before, but we've all watched Lance McCullers come back before. And um, Lance, I love you, and you've pitched great games for the Astros, including games. You started a Game 7 of the World Series, but you talk a good game about your comeback. You're so media
Quit
friendly.
talking about it. In fact, yeah.
Yes. And look, I think that's what he wants you, right? I'm not trying to be sort of that, but we've heard the Lance McCullers story on comebacks many times before, and he's approaching Forrest Whitley status. So that's one of the more interesting decisions for the Astros. They do have some money to spend, even if we assume that the goal of the payroll to be get under the luxury tax threshold and not pay that again, which I think is my walking assumption going into this offseason.
Andy, just real quick, then, your thoughts on the hypothesis of what the Astros at least have coming back that should put them in a decent position to compete.
It's hard for me to frame in what's coming back because I think we all know what's coming back. It's easier for me to poke holes. And so there has to be a concerted effort to upgrade our lineup in a couple of different areas. First base, everybody is aware of. Left field and maybe center field. And potentially third base,
Shortstop.
depending on what happens. There are grades, right? Yes, in a perfect world, we would have somebody named Francisco Lindor playing shortstop instead of somebody named Jeremy Pena. I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know that with the dollars the Astros do have to spend, you're going to upgrade at shortstop over potentially needing to find a third baseman because you have no body to play over there. Interestingly enough, right now, I think Bregman's going to re-sign with the Astros based on nothing else but vibes, but I think that's interesting. Pitching doesn't concern me with the Astros going into 2025 nearly as much as the offense does, because the offense, even though the Astros played as well or better than any other team after May 1st through the end of the year, the offense would disappear for huge swaths of that time period. And they certainly were MIA in the playoffs, and they were MIA in April, which led to a lot of what we saw this season. You've got to get consistent offense from first base. You've got to get consistent offense from at least one more of your outfield positions. I assume Kyle Tucker's not going to miss 3 months of the season. That would be hopeful. So there's so many things that the Astros have to address from their everyday lineup standpoint that I think, yes, they're going to be a player in free agency, not the big top of the line guys, unless you're talking about Bregman. But smart decisions, but where we actually use our analytics teams to find guys that will fit well with what we need. But I think part of that is going to be dealing from that very deep roster of starting pitchers. I also would not be surprised if one of Kikuchi or Verlander is back, because to Brian's point, counting on Garcia or McCullers Jr. to come back is kind of a fool's errand, especially with McCullers. We've been waiting for him to come back for parts of the last 5 seasons. I think since he signed his new contract, he's pitched 4 games. It's a very small amount of return on that investment. So it's a matter of, yeah, they probably need to sign one more veteran, and probably isn't a high price guy, but who knows what Verlander is going to want coming back. Love it if it was Kikuchi, because I think he figured out a lot of stuff while he was here in a short time. But you've got a good basis of the starting rotation. You're also going to have some depth if Javier shows like he's coming back at the All-Star break. Can't count on it, but maybe. Urquidy's going to be in the same boat. JP France can come back. Somebody might want to take a flyer on him. So I think there are going to be some pieces, especially around the All-Star break, to deal some of that starting pitching. One of our friends on Twitter, B-Buzz in Sugarland, he made a good point. They're going to run into a 40-man roster issue with all these starters who potentially are coming back in the middle of the year. So that's going to be another interesting aspect of this as well. But it all gets back to me the fact we don't have anybody to play third base. Shea Whitcomb, that one game notwithstanding, I think showed that he's not ready to be a major league player. And I don't think the Astros ever planned for him to be anything more than a stopgap for a year or two.
Yeah.
So that's not like a big organizational loss. Zach DeZenzo is the guy who was going to be the third baseman, but he now seems to be penciled in at first base potentially. Most of his minor league experience and college experience was at third base. That's his natural position, or at least where he spent the most amount of time. I don't think the Astros have necessarily given up on that idea, but I think all of us would rather see an Alex Bregman level defender manning that bag, and specifically Alex Bregman manning that bag next year. I have a good feeling about that, based on nothing other, again, than vibes. But there's just so many questions for the Astros to answer. And even with that, I still think this is a team that should be in contention, if not winning the division pretty handily next year. 5+ games. So I just don't see the Mariners getting appreciably better until they start dealing off some of that starting pitching, which negates the advantage they have currently. The A's are going to have trouble playing in Sacramento for 3 years. I think just the general vibes of that whole deal for the next 3 seasons makes it really hard on that franchise and those players. The Angels are a complete loss, and I don't see anything other than the magic of Bruce Bochy's odd years. That's evidently a thing. Making the Rangers' entire roster come back from a year where they all regressed back to their career averages. All of them.
All of them. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole, that brings us right back around to our playoff discussion, and how I got to do is get hot. We will be back around. We will be back next week to start diving a little bit into the Astros postseason. Until then, enjoy the playoffs. If your college football team is doing well, enjoy that. If your pro football team is as well. And just a reminder, because it is that week right now, it is 8:34 a.m. and OU still sucks. I'm Jim Christopher for Andy and Brian. Go Astros.